They say that a week is a long time in politics. Well, if today is anything to go by, it's going to be a long week. Just after 8 a.m. this morning, we learned that Alex Allinson had stepped down as Treasury Minister, and then shortly afterwards, Michelle Haywood had left her role as Minister for Infrastructure. The new DoI Minister is Tim Crookall. This is his third time as Infrastructure Minister since the 2021 election. And as Chanelle Sukhoo was getting Lawrie Hooper's reaction to the departures, we learned that Chris Thomas takes over as Treasury Minister. Here's that interview with Lawrie Hooper.
Well, you know as much as I do, unfortunately. This doesn't feel like it was planned. It feels very much like the Chief Minister is acting in a mad panic over something. We had an email this morning that said he was reshuffling, and then very swiftly after that, the news obviously followed about the Treasury Minister. But to be honest, I can't imagine a good reason why you would replace your Treasury Minister weeks before the budget. I just cannot picture how this is a good idea.
Does this show, or would this kind of make people lose confidence in the leadership on the Isle of Man at the moment?
Well, you're making an assumption there that we have leadership on the Isle of Man at the moment, and I don't think we do. I don't think it is the mark of a stable leadership or a good leadership to be panicking like this, to be very clearly throwing all the cards up in the air just before the last budget of the administration, just 6 months before the end of the administration. I'm really feeling we have a leadership vacuum at the moment.
And speaking about the budget, like you mentioned, it's less than a month that we need a Treasury Minister to present that budget. Has there ever been a situation like this? What would happen?
I really don't know. I would assume the Chief Minister, it's 9:05 now, I'd assume he already has a Treasury Minister candidate in mind. If he's going to appoint someone, that will be, good news. But you're right, whoever takes the reins is not going to be fully up to speed in 4 weeks. Is not going to be fully all over their brief. And the reality is, what difference are they going to make to any kind of process or any kind of thing now when they're really at the tail end of this administration?
Lawrie, as a Ramsey MHK, you represent your constituents. Has any of your constituents been reacting or reaching out since the news broke?
Not just yet. I'd expect a few of them will, probably some of the more politically interested people. But for the most part, and I think this is probably what you'll see on social media, is I suspect there'll be quite a lot of uncertainty out there now. A lot of people worried about what this means for things like the minimum wage. What does it mean for budgetary measures next month around changing taxes and all the rest of it? I think there'll be some concern out there about what this might mean. But the reality is life goes on. Whatever the drama is going on in Tynwald and at the top of government, I think people are just going to crack on with their daily lives.
And you're also part of Liberal Vannin Party. What's the party stance on this?
So as you can imagine, there have been a few messages floating around this morning since we found out. I think the party's view is pretty much the same as mine on this, which is what on earth is the Chief Minister playing at? He feels like he has finally tipped himself over the edge here. It feels like a very panicked reaction to something that's happened in the last couple of days. And I'm not convinced, and I don't think my party colleagues are convinced that a big reshuffle now is really what's in the best interest of the island.
Not long ago, we had this whole motion of no confidence in the Chief Minister. Is this something that perhaps someone would put forward again or consider putting forward again?
I expect so. The reality is, like you said earlier, this doesn't really give me the confidence that we have stable leadership right now. I suspect that quite a few of my Tynwald colleagues will be mostly in shock right now about some of what the news is coming out around these changes and disbelief, quite possibly. So I would imagine that depending on what happens in the next couple of hours or couple of days with reappointments to ministerial posts, Alf could very well be facing another vote of no confidence in the coming weeks.
Have you been offered anything? Would you take it?
No, I definitely haven't been offered anything, and no, I can't see myself accepting another job under this Chief Minister. I think he and I are very different in terms of where we see our policy priorities, and I think we have very different views on so many things. I can't see that happening, if I'm being perfectly honest.
The Chief Minister will recommend the Lieutenant Governor to appoint Chris Thomas as a Minister, Treasury Minister.
I don't think Chris would have been necessarily my first choice for the Treasury Minister portfolio. I've got a lot of time for Mr. Thomas, but he tends to spend a lot of time worrying about definitions and technicalities rather than trying to see the big picture or actually getting things done. And in some ways, I think what's needed in the last 6 months of administration is ministers who are just happy to crack on and get things done. There's not a lot of time to go back to square one and revisit every single policy decision that we've ever made. But it's an interesting appointment. I wish Chris the best of luck, but we'll see how this all pans out, I suppose.
That was Ramsey MHK Lawrie Hooper talking to Chanelle as the news broke of Chris Thomas's appointment as Treasury Minister. Did Onken MHK Rob Collister see this coming?
If we look back over the last 3 or 4 months, the Isle of Man government has been under considerable pressure, especially around the rollout of the 20 mile an hour scheme right across the east of the island. Also, businesses across the island, asking government for support as they make that difficult journey from a minimum wage to a living wage. That's really difficult for businesses to accept, especially with financial pressures on the cost of living and inflationary pressures that they've been exposed to over the last few years. So there's been a lot of pressure on government, and I'm not surprised that the announcements have been made today. I think one is transition a department into a safe pair of hands, and I think one announcement you consider to be an interesting selection.
And are you going to share with us which you think is which?
Yeah, I'll be happily to do that, Phil. I think Tim Crookall going back into the department he knows very well. He's been in there twice before. I think he is a very safe pair of hands. I'm hoping that he will now be able to deal with issues that have been highlighted in the last few days around the airport. And more importantly, for many of my constituents, the rollout of the 20 mile an hour, and to make sure that the department is actually implementing what Tynwald asked the department to do. And obviously, the surprise choice is my colleague and friend Thomas going into Treasury. And that will be very interesting because that's not an easy position for someone to have to stand up next month and deliver a budget which will not be their budget and they will have had very little input into.
And of course, we'll come on to the Treasury role shortly. The other thing that was announced in terms of the reasons for the replacement of the DoI Minister was the local government amendment bill and general relations with local government. Is that something that can be rescued? Because there does seem to be quite a split has developed between what House of Keys was willing to support and what local government itself seemed keen to support.
I think if you go back to 2022, when I was removed as the health minister, the chief minister at the time actually said very clear there is a tipping point when confidence in the public is lost. And I think we've reached that tipping point over the last couple of weeks. Now, if you take Clause 5 of the Local Government Act, it's clear that this amendment that came through from my colleague from Ramsey really upset local authorities about the implementation of it. What does it actually mean? But at the end of the day, the local authorities say this could force powers and obligations onto the local authority. They fought back. And I think where the relationship broke down was the dialogue. The department wasn't willing to listen. Even though it was a private member's amendment, the department did adopt it. And maybe that is where they went wrong.
And of course, the other thing that's mentioned was the waste strategy, which is going to Tynwald, which, as far as I understand, local authorities haven't seen yet. They weren't even made aware that it was going to Tynwald. And of course, this is local authorities are the waste collection authorities on the island, and you would have thought that maybe they might have been at least shown an advanced copy of that strategy or given a chance to comment before it went to Tynwald.
I think this goes down to the core of the issue, what people on the Isle of Man are facing at the moment. There's too many decisions being made without the correct input from stakeholders. So we'll go back to 20 mile an hour. In my constituency, I know that my constituents did not have an input into that process properly. I know that I didn't as an elected member. There was no meetings held within the boundaries of the constituency. these decisions that are being made on behalf of the people of the Isle of Man have to have the input of the key stakeholders, and that goes to the local authority bill. The local government or the local authorities across the island should have had a proper input into that process to ensure that we're making the right decisions for this island.
And you say that Chris Thomas is a surprise appointment to the Treasury. Why did you think that?
Well, we are less than 6 months to a general election. It makes no difference who was appointed the new Treasury Minister today. That would be a surprise. To change a Treasury Minister 6 months before an election, or to change a Treasury Minister less than 4 weeks before the budget here on the Isle of Man, would be a surprise for anybody. And as I say, they are massive shoes to fill, because that is not an easy position to take on. And it's definitely not an easy position to take on with such short notice.
That was Oncan MHK Rob Collister. Well, the Chief Minister has had a very busy few days, but I caught up with him earlier this afternoon.
It's been a weekend of thought, of discussion, of consideration, and a weekend in which decisions have had to be made.
Those decisions, some might argue, could have come a bit sooner. Would that be fair?
So I think the first thing that I really ought to do, Phil, is to pay tribute to the two ministers who have departed. I know other ministers have left over the tenure of this administration, but this is a difficult job. All the ministers have challenging portfolios in terms of the briefs and the legislation and the policies that they are pursuing. And both Alex Allinson and Michelle Haywood have applied themselves and worked incredibly hard. It is unfortunate, clearly, that we have got to a point where we have diverged on a number of issues, and I felt that we needed to take action to correct the course. But nevertheless, I have to recognise also their contribution, which I'm grateful for. Having made that decision now, it's important that we do pay attention to the issues that I've highlighted in the letters that have been brought out in the statements that have been made by the new ministers. We will now seek to deal with those matters as quickly as possible and approach the budget perhaps with a slightly refined attitude.
And the question that I asked, and to be fair, you sidetracked yourself maybe a little on this. Should these decisions have been taken sooner? Because it's been obvious to anyone who's been witnessing the Council of Ministers in operation that you and the Treasury Minister had diverging views on many key issues.
Well, look, it's been a difficult balancing job, to get the right people in place during this administration. There have been one or two resignations which were not expected. I think if I go right back to David Ashford's resignation in 2022, that somewhat upset the rhythm and the sort of plan, I guess, that had been set out. And my job is also not only to find the best people for the job, but also I've got a balancing act to make in terms of ensuring that I have a council. It does represent the sort of makeup of votes that are likely to occur, particularly in the House of Keys. The other point I would make is I am not a dictator, and there have been many occasions when I have voted and that vote has not been in line with the majority of council. But timing is everything. We've got to a point where I think it is fair to say on a number of occasions, particularly recently, my vote and the minority vote in council has probably reflected overall the majority view, particularly in the House of Keys, when you look at the balance of voting and the minority vote that's taken place in the Keys. So eventually you get to a point when you add all these factors up and decide that a decision has to be made, and that decision has been made. I think it's been made, of course, quite close to the budget. It comes at a point where we're just setting out our final agenda for the year ahead. But hindsight is everything. You can speculate as much as you want. I have to make that judgment call, and that judgment call was made this weekend.
And you mentioned there the budget. 4 weeks tomorrow, the Treasury Minister, the new Treasury Minister, Chris Thomas, is due to stand up and deliver a budget speech. how in 4 weeks are you going to rewrite the budget?
Well, miracles can occur, but look, the balance, the mainstay of the budget clearly isn't going to be changed fundamentally. There was a core reason, one of the core reasons in terms of the appointment of Chris Thomas was to get to resolution with the minimum wage, to restore relations, I think, between a very aggravated and frustrated business community and the government, and give Tynwald a way through this. I think that acknowledged the pressures that the business community were under, but also saw some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how we would relieve some of the pressures our people are under, whether they're low paid, medium pay, or whatever. There's a lot of people under a lot of pressure. We know that. So, fundamentally, we will be focusing on taxation, personal allowances as a fundamental part. There will also be a quick review in terms of the support that's being provided through to the economy more generally through Department for Enterprise. That will be our core focus. We'll then need to make any adjustments accordingly, because clearly if you raise personal allowances, you've got to find the balance on the other side of the balance sheet in terms of public spending. But we will do that. I'm sure we're positive and confident we can do that in the next week. And as it stands, the budget will remain on track.
Because effectively you do have to, because of the timings of briefings to members, printing budgets, all the rest of it, it really is about a week that you've got left in which you can make those significant changes in the budget.
Yes, but that's administration, and you can change administrative timescales. I know there's a bit of pressure, but fundamentally, this is about inputting figures onto spreadsheets, looking at the balance of payments and looking where you need to make the adjustments. As I said, fundamentally, of course, most of the budget is set. It won't be changed. We will be focusing now about putting money back into people's pockets, making sure that is substantial enough to give members of Tynwald confidence that voting through a slowdown in the minimum wage will be balanced out by giving not just, as I said, the low paid, but hard-working families across the pay scales in our island something of an incentive post-budget whereby they will have more money in their pocket. And of course, the upside of that is that some trust is placed, and in fact, naturally you would expect that money in many cases to filter back into the economy, whether that's in hospitality or through extra spending in other areas. So, certainly my time at Treasury Minister taught me a substantial rise in personal allowances, which I did on one occasion, despite the warnings from the officers that this was too much and we couldn't afford it. Actually, what the end result of that is, by 12 months later, we were delivering heightened tax receipts, and actually the budget was coming in completely as forecast. So there are ways to do this, and we can do it.
A number of commentators, or Tynwald members, I should say, have commented today with when asked Chris Thomas as Treasury Minister, what do you think? Well, that's a surprise. Why did you pick Chris Thomas?
Look, Chris Thomas is an intelligent man, right? He has a very good finance background. If you look at his CV and his qualifications and his degree, it's clear if you've listened to him that he understands and he gets it. And he, more than just the simple sort of economics, he has a better understanding. He also gets it when we look at what comes first in terms of actually supporting the economy, supporting people. We need to do that because we've got to pay for public services. So you've got to get your priorities right. That's the first thing that you've got to look at, because if the economy isn't functioning, then we're just not going to function when it comes to delivery of public services. So, look, it's not a surprise to me. I think actually from the reaction that I've had, it's not been a surprise to other people, or at least the appointment has been well received. Chris has got a job to do. I'm sure he'll outline his plans, and I'm confident that he will bring the necessary skills and aptitude to make this budget both a success, but also to work in the next 6 to 9 months to put in place the confidence, or restore some of the confidence needed between the Treasury and business.
Michelle Haywood, it's fair to say, hit the ground running and was eager to grasp every thorny issue and try and deliver solutions. Was that ultimately her downfall, maybe trying too hard?
Well, again, I think there have been votes that I have made that have not supported the direction of travel. Nevertheless, the majority vote has gone through. I think, there has been clearly a lot of aggravation in the policies that the DoI have been pursuing over the last year or so, including the Local Government Amendment Bill, the rapid insertion of Clause 5, the failure to come, I think, to any sort of satisfactory agreement with the local authorities, and of course the 20-mile-an-hour rollout, which has gone far beyond its scope, I think, as far as many members of Tynwald are concerned, and many of them, including Onken MHKs, particularly who've been subject to the most recent order, remain very upset at the way it's been undertaken. And I think for me, all these issues, 20-mile-an-hour rollouts, local government amendment bills, minimum wage, and when you are engaged in so many clashes with society across a broad range of elements of that society in such a way that almost you feel the government's pursuit of these objectives is just fundamentally damaging confidence in its reputation and its ability to work with people, then you have to take action. I've had to take action, Phil. The clear aim and stated ambition is to restore relationships, restore confidence, put in place now, particularly with the minimum wage and the budget, the right mechanisms for us to get every chance of economic growth, every chance to ease some of the pressures that so many people are facing, and to stop the fighting, and to move forward in a more measured and sensible manner.
Tim Crookall, obviously taking over from Michelle Haywood. Is this third time lucky with Tim?
I'm sure it is. Look, Tim Crookall again stepped down last year. There was no reason for him to do so. I mean, I think, I'd moved him from the DoI to accommodate Michelle Haywood because of a need to reshuffle. He's always been there for the island, and I would say about Tim Crookall, he's been willing to put his hand up. I know there's been some times when he's sort of had enough and thrown in the towel because he's had a longish political career, but he's been there. He's been incredibly loyal in terms of trying to support the government and move things forward properly. He's considered. He likes to ensure that everybody is heard appropriately, and I am totally confident that he will grip the issues that we've just been talking about, move things forward successfully.
And then the final question, really, from me, you have critics, and some of them are in Tynwald. They will point to the fact that there are 2.5 Council of Ministers worth of ex-ministers during your tenure. Have you ever thought, and I'm guessing that some Tynwald members are going to push this question, have you ever thought that maybe it's actually the person in the Chief Minister's chair that's the problem?
Look, I make decisions. I work with what I'm given, and as you know, I've tried to accommodate views. If anything, I have probably been far too considerate and far too ready to sort of accede to consensus views, when actually I should have been putting my foot down. I probably should have been driving in a different direction, and perhaps, ideally, loading the council with all the people who I knew were just going to vote the right way. But that by itself probably would not been enough for us to have moved forward in a sensible way. And as I said, part of the trick of running the political system that we do when you have so many independents, is trying to ensure that you've got some balance in the Council of Ministers so that you can reach across Tim Ward. It's not a party system, Phil. It doesn't offer perhaps the attraction that one might have of loading a Council of Ministers with everybody who technically is completely signed up to your agenda. And that's the way that politics works over here. So people can think what they want. Of course, they're entitled to think along the lines that you've just suggested. But we had a vote of confidence last year. I'm committed to pushing things forward and delivering for the people of this island. And I've had to make tough decisions again. And so be it. That is it. And I'm confident that I've made the right decisions at the right time. As I say, we'll push it through now to a budget that will deliver for the people of this island. We've set out the framework about how that's going to be delivered. We'll sort out the row with business. We'll re-establish relationships. I'm sure put some confidence back in the fact that government is listening to people, whether that's local authorities, whether that's drivers and society being affected by 20-mile-an-hour zones, or whether it is business and people who are impacted by minimum wage. I want us to start listening, working together and finding the solutions that will bind us together as a society and take us forward, not drive us apart.
That was Aaron Michael MHK and Chief Minister Alf Cannon. So what do you think? Is this too little too late, or do you think the replacement ministers have time to make a difference before the September election? This must be the Chief Minister's last throw of the dice, but will it have the desired effect? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com, and please get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast. For now, I'm Phil Gaughan. Go to Thanks for listening.